interesting and very relevant session, how to support students seeking financial aid and merit scholarships. So our panelists for this session are going to be John Liu, Joe Morrison, Ryan Benitez, who are going to be online, and we have Laura Cobb with us. And just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. The student volunteers will be handing over to you the feedback forms and the gratitude card. So we would invite you to give your feedback, and if you want to fill up the gratitude card, we would invite you to do that, and once it's done, you can just hand it over to the student volunteers. And we would just like to invite you to keep your mobile phones either on silent or to switch it off. This will definitely help you to concentrate better. So I invite you to participate in this session through the Q&A part. And now I would like to hand over to Laura. Over to you, Laura.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Testing, testing. Do you hear me okay, everyone? No. So you don't hear me. Do you hear me, Joan? No.
Yes.
Hello, hello. Oh, yes? Please, of course, please. Yeah, feel free. We love engagement, but we're not going to, shout at you. We'll assume that if you're using your phone, it's because you're earnestly recording all sorts of important notes from our conversation. You will not be judged. If people want to move up, though, that would be great, because you're all, it's just me in the room holding it down, because all of my colleagues are here. I'm not scary, I promise. But I appreciate everyone coming, especially those of you who came on time. Oh, something else happened. So I appreciate everyone coming on time, appreciating especially that you perhaps didn't get much lunch or any lunch, and instead came to listen to us talk, so thank you. My name is Laura Cobb, and I work with something called the Duolingo UNHCR University Access Program. And I am joined by three colleagues here who will introduce themselves in a moment. We are here to talk about how you as high school counselors, as university access advisors, can support students with financial need. We know, of course, that not everybody has the funds and the family resources to pay for the full cost of study, particularly study abroad in other countries, for example, my country, United States, which is extremely expensive. And so we want to help equip you with some information, some resources, some networks that in turn can help you advise those students who are from middle or lower income backgrounds as they also pursue their higher education dreams. Let me ask our panelists to introduce themselves from the rest of the, the virtual room here, and then we'll get started. Joan, do you want to start?
Sure. Everybody, my name is Joan Liu. I can't see everybody in the audience, but I hope that you feel welcome to come towards the front, since I think that people are kind of filing into the room. Laura, thanks for that introduction. My name is Joan Liu, and I'm here in England, and I'm the founder of a program called Second Chance, and I'll hand it over to Ryan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Benitez. Nice to meet you. I'm calling from Washington, D.C., where it is very early or very late, depending on your perspective. And I am the CEO of an organization called METO, M-E-T-O. We're a nonprofit aiming to help African students connect with higher ed opportunities. Off to Joe. Joe, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm Joe Morrison. It's nice to meet you all. I'm in Buffalo, New York, in the same time zone as Ryan. It's 3:30 a.m. here, but I'm excited to have this chat together I'm the CEO of an ed tech company called Concourse, which is an online platform where universities apply for students, kind of flipping the narrative. And I'm happy to be part of this conversation.
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks, Joan. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Joe and Ryan and Laura. I can see everybody coming into the room. I just want to say welcome to everybody. A big wave from England and Buffalo and Washington, D.C. It's very nice to be here. Let me just give you an overview of this session and kind of some of the things that we're going to talk about. As Laura said, we're going to be speaking about affordability and also access. I just want to set the intention for this hour that we're together. I would really hope that this is a starting point for those of you. Can you raise your hands if you work with any students who are seeking full financial aid? So basically a zero EFC student needing full tuition, room and board. Thank you, everybody. I can see your hands raised. And can you raise your hand if you're working with students who are seeking a more affordable option, meaning they have some amount of money, maybe 10 to 15K, and they're looking for something that's more affordable? Fantastic. So we're going to talk about both of those types of students today. And hopefully by the end of the session, you have at least one or two things that you can put in your toolbox so that you can help be a better guide to these students. These students are really important in regards to access, because both sets of students are searching for something that is more affordable, and in some cases, whether or not they get the aid allows them to access higher education or not. So here's what we're going to do in this session. We're going to go and do basically a big overview of different country systems, general country systems. Then Laura is going to talk specifically about students who we call zero EFC students. If you haven't heard the word EFC, it means estimated family contribution. Okay? Estimated family contribution. So these are students who need full tuition, room and board, and in some cases, indirect costs, like the flight, the visa, maybe immunizations. Okay, and then I will talk after she speaks about students who maybe have 15K. We will be speaking in reference to the US currency. So we will always be kind of speaking in USD. You'll have the slides in front of you so you can convert them into whatever currency you're using in your country. Then we will talk a little bit about the role that ed tech has to play. I think that there are some really, I think especially like you've heard from Ryan and from Joe, there's some really interesting tools, emerging tools that are out there that if you're not aware of, you should be, and also the role that ed tech is starting to play, has been playing in the marketplace. And then we'll take questions for 20 minutes. Everybody, we're super happy to have you here. If you're here, it means that you really care about affordability and access, and you want some more tools in your toolbox. So let's get started then. Okay, could we see the first slide? All right, and I myself can't see the slide, but in general, oh, there we go. Okay, that's fantastic. It's a little virtual. Okay. Most of us are sending a lot of students to the US and the UK and Canada, and so we wanted to start kind of with that touch point. And the cost of the US education over the years has really risen. When I went to school 20 years ago, it was about 40,000 USD for tuition, room and board, and that has now since doubled. So as you can see on the slide, we've kind of put this into private and public, but in general for the United States, this is kind of the cost ranges of both a private education and a public education. Okay, now this is really important that you kind of get this in your mind, because it can be very expensive. As you can see, it can be something like $85,000. I think that that's the top end of the ceiling. And then the floor tends to be around 25. There are exceptions to that. I mean, I'm sure that there's a school out there that is 20 or 15, but in general, this is what the marketplace looks like. In the UK and in Canada, you will see that we are dealing with about $35,000 per year. The UK, remember, is a 3-year program, a 3-year undergraduate degree. The US is 4 years as well. So the US will cost you something like up towards, it could be something like $320,000 if you went to the top end of the market and didn't get any aid or scholarships. You can see that UK and Canada are at a lower cost point, but that you can get still an undergraduate degree. You can also see that Australia is at a lower cost point. So why are we telling you this? Because if you have a student who's only looking at the United States, but can pay $35,000, one thing you might want to think to yourself is, should they simply look at other markets as well? You know, like the UK, like Canada, like Australia. And then on the next slide, We can also see now some even like just a range of cost. Laura, can I ask you to take this slide and take everyone through it?
Sure. Thanks, Joan. As Joan mentioned, and I'm gonna credit her with this word that she invented somewhere called geoswerve. And sometimes we talk about geoswerving students from one country or region that they might be really kind of fixated on, and getting them to, in fact, explore universities in other parts of the world where there is not only a range of wonderful education opportunities, but also more affordable opportunities. And so as we think about geoswerving, there are some wonderful universities around the world that in many cases, for example, on the screen here, that follow a North American or a so-called liberal arts approach. They have flexible and diverse majors or courses of study. They have the things that it used to be, you know, we thought of as coming with only a US university, for example, internship programs, study abroad programs, a lot of student life, enrichment activities, clubs, and all these things that we don't think of as sort of in the old school university model, right, where you went to class and then you went back home. So there are these wonderful opportunities now around the world that students don't often know about, and their families, their parents don't often know about. And they're much more affordable, as you can see on the screen here, from Al Ahwain in Morocco to Binis in Indonesia, all the way through Ashoka University, Flame University, Korea University here in India, wonderful options, APU Ritsumeikan in Japan. So these are institutions that offer the global quality and the international experience of some of the more expensive options you might find in the US and Canada. And they do offer either partial or full financial aid opportunities for students who are in need of that, whether merit or need-based financial aid, they have these as well. In addition, some countries are clever enough that they've realized there's a real benefit from having international students, international to wherever they are, and have some government scholarships that are specifically for students from outside that home country to help diversify the education experience. And so a lot of these go by unknown to students and unknown to families who have, you know, sort of the mindset of those 4 or 5 universities they've heard of in 1 or 2 countries, and then the rest is sort of there be monsters on the map, right? They don't even know. And that's part of what we want to encourage, equip you to encourage students and families to explore more widely for the quality of experience, but for a fraction of the price. Can we see the next slide, please? Joan, is that you, or shall I take it away?
Oh, please take it away, Laura. Thanks.
Yes. So you can see from my sophisticated graph-making abilities here, right? You know, as a friend of mine says, I have other skills. But the reality is this. I don't think this will shock too many of you. But as the amount that a student or a family can pay goes down, right, competition for admission with financial aid goes up. Right? This is not, you know, groundbreaking, but it's critically important for students and their families to understand, and I believe for advisors to be incredibly frank and transparent and blunt, if you need to, about this fact, right? The reality is, if you want full financial aid, if you need thousands and thousands of dollars of financial aid, you had better be a top performing student, probably not only in academics, but also in other aspects of student life, such as extracurricular activities, you know, a really strong set of letters of recommendation and these sorts of things. It's not fair, but it's true. If you are, the poorer you are, the harder it is for you to get admitted to the types of universities that offer really generous financial aid, particularly in the US. And so we want students to be aware of this up front, and when they understand that, funnily enough, they become more flexible. They start being willing to look a little more broadly at all these other wonderful options that are more affordable, right? So it's good to make a clear footing of what is your estimated family contribution, which, by the way, many universities now are starting to call expected family contribution. They're not estimating anymore. They are expecting, right? So always the foundation of the conversation is, what is the EFC? And then, okay, what are your academics and what's available to you given your need? Does that make sense? Okay, next slide, please. Thanks, Krishnami. So as Joan mentioned, I'm particularly going to speak about working with so-called HALI students. That stands for High Achieving Low Income. HALI students are, that's an acronym that has been invented by the US admissions world, but it has come to be applied very broadly, like strong students, but low financial resources, right? And as I've just said, the financial need has got to be the starting point. It is not helpful for a student who has high financial need to apply to universities that cannot meet that need, that do not give scholarships in the amount that the student needs, right? And I tell students, like, when I go to the mall, right, I go to some fancy mall and there's Louis Vuitton and name all of these fancy stores. I'm an educator. Do I go into those stores? I can't afford to go into those stores. I can't afford to shop in those places, right? They don't have anything I can buy, right? Higher education access is a similar reality. If the university does not give financial aid and you need it, you can't go there. The good news is there are lots of other wonderful places to go instead. So start from, what can the family pay? Or how much does the student need? Then the conversation goes from there. With transparency and with flexibility, there's a lot of great options. When you are working with more than one high-need student, it's really critical to carefully manage that individual student's list so that, of course, they are applying to the universities where they will be competitive for both admission and financial aid, but also the list of all of the applicants who are seeking high financial aid, right? If you have a dozen students, you have 12 students who need full scholarships, should they all apply to the same 2 universities? Of course not, right? If you are lucky, you might be finding that 1 or 2 of your high need students is admitted by one university. They're not going to admit 12 from your school or your NGO or your program, right? So the list needs to be diverse for the individual student to have a good range of opportunities of potential admissions with funding. But the list also needs to be diversified across the pool so the amount of the chances of your students competing against each other for that financial aid are as low as possible. And that's hard, and that's really one of the areas where you as advisors and counselors lean into the advising and counseling part and saying to a student or a family, yes, I know that you've heard of this one famous university that everyone's heard of. However, let me talk to you about these other wonderful options so that you are not competing against each other and knocking each other out of the opportunity. Does that make sense? It's a tough competition. These are the times when, if you're like a loud, blunt American like me, it's easier, you know? You know, it's more difficult in some other contexts, in some other cultures. I've definitely made students and mothers cry accidentally before. But however nicely you put it, the transparency is key so that students and families can apply most effectively and cultivate the most opportunities. And I always remind students that, you know, if there are, you know, say there's 100 people in this room, that's at least 100 pathways to success, right? Students, you know, who are exposed to the university admissions world and families who've only heard of a couple brand names and a couple famous jobs, right? Doctor, lawyer, engineer, business, disgrace to the family, right? Those are the 5 careers in the old school thinking, right? Gone are those days. But you do have to really advise and sometimes drag the students and the families out of that mindset and into a mindset of, let me see all that's out there and let me find the right fit for me and my financial need. Next slide, please. Joan, I think that's over to you.
Thanks, Laura. I always love listening to Laura because for the past 15 years, a lot of what I've learned about HALI students, I have learned from Laura Cobb. So Laura, it's so nice to have you here on this panel. All right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about students who have some amount of money. Okay, Laura was talking about zero expected family contribution students. We're going to talk now about students who have a little bit of money and what you can do with this. So the first thing that you can do, of course, is look for countries with a lower price point that also have a scholarship. So one good example of this would be the India's liberal arts colleges like Ashoka, Flame, Korea. You know, those schools where you can get basically a scholarship for tuition and then maybe you have to pay room and board. And I believe some of these schools cost around $13,000 to $15,000, so you end up paying about $4,000. $4,000 is less than the $15K EFC. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about affordability. If we could put the slide back up so I can guide everybody through the slide, that would be great. I can see, oh, and I can see everybody in the room now. Hi, everybody. Okay, so this is a student who this is an actual case study. This is a student who wanted a lower price point and was looking at the United States. And it is a past student that I worked with. I have asked his permission to share his case study here. And just to give you a sense of his credentials, okay, so this was a student who was at my previous school, the United World College, and he was a student who wanted engineering, and he was a Chinese male student applying to the United States, an IB diploma student, and was basically in the top 25% of the class. Now, why is that point really important? Because we know that in the United States, it is context dependent, not just credential driven. So the top 25% of the class, a 40 might be at another school within the top 10% of the class, but at my recent school, it was in the top 25% of the class. Okay, so I know that now as a counselor, right? And I know that he this was during the time when SATs were required and they were not test optional because this was pre-pandemic. This is kind of where he was in regards to the SAT. And because I know one of you mentioned it's very hard to see this slide, it's basically he was above a 1450. So fairly competitive, all right? In general, what you need to know is this is a fairly competitive student, but not a crazy top lifetime student, okay? If you were working with a student who needed full financial aid, the profile would need to be stronger than this. It would need to be way stronger than this. The kind of student that Laura is talking about has to be above this particular student profile. But for the purposes of getting some sort of affordability, this profile will work. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so what did we do in regards to this student? I want you to notice that half of this slide is orange and half of this slide is blue because we did a mix of both public and private institutions. And what we did was we looked at different institutions at different price points, as well as institutions that were private that had large scholarships. Okay, that might sound a little bit complicated, but basically we were trying to get the price down as low as possible. And you can see on the slide, and I'm sorry that the slide is very hard to see for those of you who are virtual, but there is a range of scholarships here that are automatic, that are merit scholarships. And by that, I mean that the student did not need to fill out any financial documentation to apply for merit scholarships. If you were a zero EFC student, the kind of student that Laura was just talking about, you would absolutely need to fill out some sort of proof that you needed aid, okay? This is a student who is seeking some sort of affordable option in another country. He could still go to something within Singapore that would cost $15,000 with a scholarship. So this student had some measure of choice, all right? But he wanted to look at the US, and so we were trying to get this to be a more affordable option for him. So as you can see in the slide, and if you can't read it, I'll just kind of debrief it for you. The scholarships can range from like 2,000 off of the sticker price, let's call it, to something that is huge, like Lokesh, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, you can see what happened here. And again, I apologize to those of you who are virtual, but basically he ended up, and I'll just read this out for those of you who cannot see the slide. He applied to Cal Poly, Case Western. He also applied to University of Florida, he applied to University of Miami, Virginia Tech, University of Wisconsin at Madison. And you can see, I tried to split this slide up, and we'll try to get these slides to you afterwards so that you can kind of like look at these, because I can recognize that these are hard to see. You can see that there was a total cost of attendance, and then you can see the scholarship in the next middle column, and then you can see the cost of attendance after scholarship. And I just broke this down so that it was super simplified so that the family could basically see, okay, what are we dealing with? And we can see that in the case of University of Florida, he only has to pay about $11,000 per year, which is 1/4 of the cost of the total cost of attendance. So he ended up going to University of Florida. How did he do this? Because basically we worked from the very beginning to look at a range of options across both the private sector and the public sector. And we applied to schools, he applied to schools that had the possibility of a scholarship that would make this affordable. In other words, it took a lot of research on his family's part. And the research responsibility I put mainly in the hands of the family. I was there to guide them a little bit and to say, okay, but think about this, you know, is this the engineering program you want? Like, I was sort of there as like a reinforcing compass, but I wasn't playing the sort of dictatorial or, as Laura said, giving a hard conversation, you know, being fully transparent at the risk of making somebody cry. Like, that wasn't the role that I was playing. I was playing a different role as a guidance counselor, which was more like encouraging the student to do as much robust research as possible, maybe directing them to some possible resources, explaining to them how to read some of the financial language that was on websites. Sometimes people will say we offer a full scholarship, but what they really mean is that they offer full tuition. And that's their definition of a full scholarship. So I was guiding them in regards to those kinds of things, and that was the role that I was playing. Next slide, please. So in terms of this particular population, what you really want to look at is giving the student agency, really empowering them, and also making sure that they are taking into consideration like affordability. So that would be what I would call the sort of analog paper way of doing things. The other way that I now use to help students who have a little bit of money who are looking for an affordable option is concourse. Joe, you can talk more a little bit about that, but basically, as Joe said, universities apply to students, and that also makes it easy for me to see like what automatic scholarships are coming in. So that's another tool that I have used. I've kind of combined ed tech, and there are many tools that you can look into. I don't know if there are other platforms like the one that I just mentioned, but those are the two things that I use to kind of help a student find the most affordable options that are out there. And Laura, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Joan. Just two quick things. One, we will, as we've mentioned, share these slides, and wherever you see the blue highlight, that's a linked resource. So if I remember correctly, that link right there, I forget what it jumps to. It might be a list of universities around the world that give financial aid, or it'll be a link to the NACAC or International ACAC resources page, or we have a resources page at the end. You'll see several others. So it's worth grabbing the slides, even if you kind of remember what we talked about. We will have several links there for you. The other thing that we haven't mentioned as a resource yet, but I want to encourage you, because we're here, but not only because we're at this wonderful conference, the admissions officers at the universities are an excellent resource. And you will find that the vast majority, especially in the international admissions world, the vast majority of the admissions officers are very accessible. They're very welcoming. They're very happy to answer questions and to have really direct questions put to them. Listen, here's my context. I'm at this school. I'm working with this student with this sort of situation. Can you please clarify what this means when you say full scholarship? Or would this student be able to combine this, then, and that, or scholarships? Or you can seek that guidance from the admissions officers. You can find, if you are international ACAC members, the membership tab is searchable by uni and by representative. You can find the admissions officer who reads for your region or your school, country, neighborhood, whatever. don't discount the fact that you can directly ask the admissions offices for assistance as long as it's not blatantly obvious on their website. If you write and say like, "Hi, what's the average SAT score of your admitted students?" They will be like, "Let me remind you about Google," you know? But if you have a specific question, don't hesitate to lean on our counterparts across on the other side of the desk. Thanks, Joan.
Thanks, Laura. And just to add on to what Laura said, for those of you who are new to this profession, I know that many of you might be new. We were just at a conference where 50% of the attendees were new. When Laura says, contact the admissions office, how do you do that? On most websites, there will be an admissions office that's a general, admissions at venus.edu, for example. But in the United States, there will usually be a list of folks by region. So you can actually see who reads for East Africa, who reads for Southeast Asia. And so you can actually write directly to that person rather than just a general email. However, if there's a general email, you can write to that. But I usually will write to a specific person if I can. And if I can't find a specific person, then I default to the regular admissions email. And I totally want to just second what Laura said in regards to asking admissions officers. With that last example that you just saw, we reached out to University of Florida and we said, what do you think about these students' chances? Do you think that this is an application that you would encourage? So we did have some back and forth a little bit with that office. And in my experience, sometimes even if you explain to an officer that maybe there's $2,000, $3,000 standing in the way of a student, in some cases with, for example, public universities that tend to stack scholarships, if the person is a super access warrior, I have had on occasion somebody say, okay, well, let me go see if there's another scholarship that we can see if we can fill the gap with, So I completely, thanks Laura for mentioning that as a fantastic resource. And thank you to those admissions officers who are perhaps in the room for the work that you do. Okay, let's now talk a little bit about, switch gears and talk a little bit about EdTech and how EdTech is, supporting this space. And I'd really love to hear from Ryan and Joe about your experiences in regards to affordability, what you see happening in this space. If you could also just tell us a little bit about perhaps, what you see in what is going on in your platforms, that would be really helpful. And Ryan, if it's okay, if we could start with you, that would be fantastic.
For sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Joan and Laura and Joe, it's amazing to be on a panel with you all. Even at 3:30 in the morning, it feels great. So anyway, I thought maybe what I could do is define EdTech very fast. So EdTech is education technology mashed into one word. And really, Joe and I are here to talk about the role that organizations or companies in this space can play in facilitating some of the decisions that Joan and Laura have been talking about. So that is EdTech. Maybe I could start by saying that EdTech is not a magic bullet, and it can be helpful, and Joe and I will explain how. But EdTech is not the kind of thing where if your student creates a profile with an EdTech organization or company, all of a sudden they are going to get a full scholarship. Laura talked about being very transparent about and realistic about a student's chances, and EdTech is there to facilitate things and create some efficiency in the system. However, there's a big dearth of scholarship funding. That's one of the reasons it's so hard for students to get funding, which Laura alluded to in the beginning. She said the more financial aid or scholarships that you need, well, the greater the competition for that seat. And so the reason is because the pot of money is only so big. And this is what we're all kind of frustrated about, struggling with, is that there's just not enough money to go around. And so as I see it, that is the bottleneck in this system, the primary bottleneck. It's not even the know-how of counselors. You could be the best counselor in the world and still be stymied by your students not getting in with enough financial aid, purely because there's not enough scholarship funding in this system. So sorry to start out on a sobering note, but we wanted to start there, and then hopefully now we can go on to a few ways that EdTech can help, now that I've explained a little bit about what it can't do. So happy to go on, but also don't want to go on too long. Joe, do you want to maybe make a couple comments? We can go back and forth here.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's really an important point that you raised. You know, there are only so many scholarship dollars to go around. And one point that Laura made earlier was around the fact that really the more financial aid needed by a student, really the higher their grades need to be, right? And so there's going to be some students where the problem is difficult but tractable. You know, if you have just a stellar student who needs a lot of aid, or if you have a student who's maybe not so stellar but has a larger budget. Where I think ed tech is kind of interesting is on the edge there, where you have the really tough boundary cases where you need to cast a wide net. And that's what ed tech is really good at, is searching large amounts of data to find solutions. And so, you know, the question is, let's say you have a student who's, you know, kind of right on the edge in terms of academics and has a smallish budget. So it's kind of a hard problem for counselors. That's where a platform like Mito or like Concourse or there's others, you know, that's where you have the best chance of like hoping to zero in on a low cost option that maybe you as the counselor or the student hadn't thought about. So I'd say kind of in general, the role of ed tech platforms here help counselors and students explore options more widely, and also maybe even help with the family part, where you might be working with a family whose sights are a little high and you want them to be realistic. And, you know, if you run a search for a student and then it comes up with a list of here's 10 options that might work, and they're not all Ivy League options, that might be helpful to have a printed report that you can show a family saying, why don't we start with this and, you know, explore within this space. So I think those are all areas where ed tech platforms like ours can be helpful.
Yeah, to pick up there, Joan and Laura, I think, did a masterful job explaining the need for transparency when it comes to finances for you all, the counselors. So you make finances a major point early and often. And then throughout the process, you are calibrating at every point to say, all right, well, can you afford this? Even if you are Einstein and get all the scholarships that, you know, you could possibly get at this university, could you actually go at the end of the day? Those conversations can often be, one of the reasons that they're difficult to have is because there's not a lot of transparency sometimes from the universities. So you could be doing all you can to make sure that students are making wise decisions. But one thing that ed tech can do is to create some transparency with finances, and especially the net cost to students. So the cost of attendance might be $50,000, and a university might be interested in a student who can afford less than that. One of the roles ed tech can play is it can pretty quickly tell a student, hey, based on your unique academic profile and the scholarships available at the university, this seems like it would be a fit. Or to Joe's point, this seems like it wouldn't be a fit. Maybe the Ivy Leagues aren't a fit, but here are 10 universities that are. That assessment of like the academic performance and the financial ability of the student, it's such a mysterious interplay that is often very difficult to really pinpoint. But that is one of the ways that ed tech can be super helpful for you all counselors, is bringing some transparency to how realistic is it for a student with this profile to be able to go to this school with these scholarships. Ed tech is increasingly good at that.
There's one other, oh, sorry, there's one other comment I thought I could make as well. Maybe there's a point worth raising. There's a movement now around kind of reversing the narrative and having colleges come to students rather than the other way around. That's reflected in a couple of ed tech companies, Mito and Concourse, but also there's other organizations working on this. The idea being that a student somehow can be put forward by a counselor and reviewed by institutions who can then proactively come forward with admission offers or scholarship offers. And that reversal, that's something that's new and pretty exciting, because it also means that it's a different way of approaching the search problem. You know, how do you find a scholarship for a student who needs X dollars of financial aid to make something work? If you can set it up so that the universities are doing just a little bit more of the homework and able to step forward and say, we have an offer to make for your student, and this is how much we can offer, then that can reduce the workload of at least collecting that initial data around what's available.
Joe, Ryan, do you guys mind if I just give a concrete example and from a counselor perspective of how ed tech has been helpful?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So I had a student this year who was struggling in his classes and was sort of in the, like, say, let's 24 to 28 range on the IB scale, okay? Which means that he's a good student because he's passing the IB. The IB is a very rigorous program, but he's not at the top of the class at my former school. I mean, you saw what was more towards the top of the class. So, so this is what, and Joe, I'll just use an example from your platform since I know it. He put his profile up, okay, and waited for things to come in. Now, he spent some time on his profile so that basically people could understand, you know, what his academic credentials were, what he got at GCSE, you know, what he was interested in. But then in regards to universities doing a little bit more work, the universities then made him offers on the platform. So there were a couple of schools that came forward that I, as a counselor, didn't know would be interested in my student. And so just to name a couple of them, it was like York University, which he was looking at the UK. So that fit what he was initially aligned with. But then there was a school, University of Lancaster in Germany. There's a satellite campus there that made him an offer. The College of Worcester made him an offer. And then also some of the schools in the SUNY system made him an offer. And what was interesting to me was that they came with scholarships, automatic scholarships towards the end of the year. So I think the other role that ed tech can play is off-cycle placement. And Ryan and Joe, I would love if you could talk a little bit about off-cycle placement. I mean, Second Chance and some other organizations, you know, are starting to do this as well. But could you talk a little bit about something that's not within the regular timeline that the ed tech is kind of pushing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a comment, and Brian, you probably have comments on this as well. Yeah, one of the things that we realized as we were kind of coming up with this system where you can put a student forward to receive offers from from colleges is we realized, why do we have to align that with the, kind of big bang kind of standard admission cycle? And so we decided this could be an almost continuous process, something that you can do every month. And then we found that at different times of year, there's different kind of use cases, if you like, for when you might want to get offers for students. For example, if you're trying to help cast a wide net and find out a reasonable range of options for each student, that's something you can do in September or October, kind of before the traditional application cycle, to help kick off a college search. Often for students who lack confidence or they're really anxious about the whole process, if they're holding an admission offer and it's only September, that's a huge confidence builder, and a student could potentially find the institution that they're looking for up front. And then you have the traditional application cycle. Then in the spring, you have kind of another round where you have opportunities maybe in March and April where students didn't get the offers they were hoping for, or they're geo-swerving. That might be another off-cycle moment when it would be nice if you could sort of quickly put your student forward and get admission offers. And then post May 1st is another universe, where it's especially important to be able to get admission offers and be flexible, be able to quickly serve students. So yeah, we're sort of questioning. I think it's part of the role of the ed tech community to kind of question norms and sort of figure out, can we revisit kind of some of the things we've all accepted as givens, and just figure out if there's a better way to serve both institutions and counselors and students, by just changing how things have been done. Ryan, I don't know what experience you've had or thoughts around off-cycle placement.
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot to add from what you and Joan have said.
If I can jump in super quickly, and then I know we need to move to questions, but because I'm the brash American and shouting about transparency and bluntness, and we've been a little vague in using examples from Mito and Concourse. Mito is a nonprofit, Concourse is a for-profit, although very affordable platform. And we took the IC3 message very loud and clear. Ganesh and everybody was like, for the love of God, do not do sales, right? So we're not trying to do sales. But if I can just articulate from a counselor's perspective, when you use one of these programs, for example, Mito or Concourse, the student fills a profile, provides some basic information about their academics, themselves, their activities, their situation. And then the universities can see that and review that and reach out to the students who meet their profiles, right? Who are the sorts of students they're looking for in their next admission cycle. And that's very powerful. That's what Joe and Ryan are referring to when they say flip the narrative. It's not the students and families chasing unis hoping to get in, but it's actually the universities coming to the students based on that profile and saying, hey, you're the sort of student we're looking for, and we have these scholarships. Would you like to apply? And it's very measured. It's not predatory. There's no marketing in it. It's not like creepy agents stalking the students or anything. But it gives information to the students and families and to you as counselors and advisors that you can use to help the students be very sensible and practical, and also, as Joe said, optimistic and confident as they're applying to universities around the world. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. And as I mentioned, this is the resources page. All of those are linked, and so you can refer to them later. Joan, I'm sorry, I re-flipped the script there and dived in where is there anything else that you wanted to say to close, or did I cut anybody off, or should we do questions?
Oh, not at all, Lauren. Thanks for moving us on to the question part of the session.
Okay, so, pleasure. Questions. Obviously, I'm the only one here, but you can see me later if you have individual questions. Feel free to find me later. Our contact information is on the slides, and so you can always reach out to any of us that way. But we do have 10 minutes, so would anybody like to ask a question or share an experience, some advice? Yes. Is it Paula, maybe? Is that right?
Hello, everyone. I'm Paula from West Africa, Côte d'Ivoire. Okay, this year I struggled a lot to get financial aid for my students, though they were brilliant, and then even one of them decided to do a gap year. Yes, to take time to look for, because she has a very great marks. She was also good academically, and then she has done a lot of leadership activities, though she couldn't, even at SAT, she got 1,400. Yeah, but yeah, and grade 12 also she did very well in her grades. So, but she couldn't. She wanted to go to US. She didn't get the scholarship or the financial aid she was expecting. So actually, she said she would take a gap year and then take time to decide. To choose a school. So we need to know. What I need to know actually is like, is there any list, like the resources you shared? How are we going to get into it? Because when we get to that, though as a counselor, you need also to tell the student, okay, maybe with your profile, with all that you have, you can go to such university, and so we need definitely to have a list of of universities.
So Paula raises a very good sort of bigger picture question, is like, for the love of God, why isn't there a list? Like, why isn't there one list, one place where all the universities explain their scholarships so we can see, you know, the research that has to go into finding a list of even 5 or 10 unis where a student can be competitive is really hard. There isn't one mega list yet, unfortunately. There are resources that we've shared on the page, and including, if we can go back to the resources slide just for 1 sec, please, I'll show you. First of all, Paula, and anybody working on the continent in particularly, MITO, you should definitely use MITO. Talk to me about it later, because it focuses on helping low-income African students. So this Jenny Kent's US list, it's actually Jenny and a guy named Jeff or something, but I like the lady to get the credit. So Jenny and her partner, whoever he is, have a wonderful list that is updated every single year. It is on their website, it's linked there. And it provides a list of all US universities that give international students financial aid, right? And but it could be a range of amount. It could be $1,000, it could be 10, it could be 75,000, right? And so that list is a great starting point, but it's not very nuanced. And so what I've done, I've totally stolen, but I do give credit. The second link there says Laura's list. That is something that I've just made in you know, of my own experience. It stands to be corrected, but it is a list of only the universities in the United States, plus some others, including on the continent, that meet full need for international students, whether through merit or financial or need-based financial aid. Because it's wonderful if, you know, like, Middle University gives $10,000, but if my kid needs $60,000, they might as well give none, right? So we don't even look at those. Sorry, someone else will go there, wonderful university that I just made up, it's not a real place, but we're gonna look at where they have the need, of the ability to meet the need. So that's a tailored list there. It's definitely not the be-all, end-all. It can be updated, et cetera. If you find mistakes on it, tell me. That's one place to start. The other thing I would say is that's where ed tech platforms like MITO and Concourse and maybe others can be helpful. Because again, the students filling the info, saying what they need, and the unis that have that are coming to her. Does that make sense? Yes.
Hi, I'm Aparna and I'm from Silver Oak School, Bangalore. I had a question. When I was researching for my students this year, I found a lot of listings of private scholarships for higher education abroad for international students. I am not sure if these are, if these are verified. How do I find out? Are there any other resources I can go? Not just university websites, what universities offer, but other scholarships. Maybe it is governmental scholarships, or they are scholarships which are being offered, let us say, for studying a particular subject. It could be biology, stem cell, any one of those. How do I validate those? Is there a way?
Thanks. So this question is good, and please, anybody on virtual, jump in if I'm missing something. Hopefully you heard the question okay. But there is, right, this idea of external financial aid, right? Meaning not from the university, but from some other source. It might be foundations or NGOs that are doing good work, like MasterCard Foundation, certainly on the continent. It might be companies doing corporate social responsibility scholarships, which are, you know, investments that they make in future talent, you know, future employees. It could be governments. Certainly, it's definitely important to vet these things and make sure they're legit. The easy answer for the government things is that information would be on their website or your local embassy for that country, and there are many. Mauritius has a wonderful scholarship that I think a lot of Indian students and families might be interested in, but there are many governments that do this. Hungary has an exceptional scholarship program for students from many different countries, so they're out there, but if you're not finding the information on the embassy's website or from a representative of that government, then you know, more research is probably needed. Same thing if it's a corporate or a foundation scholarship. It should be on their website. It should be their information. And if you're not finding it from that verified source, then maybe go to that source and be like, I heard about this. Is it real? But I take your point that there may be some stories around, and seek that information from the source. You could even, in fact, write to a university that you do have a relationship with and say, oh, hey, my student has been informed about this scholarship that she could bring to study with you. Have you heard of this scholarship? Do you have other students who have this scholarship? And you might verify a little bit that way. But due diligence is important. And we must never fail to think of external funding opportunities when they exist. They are fewer on average than the other side, than institutional financial aid, but it could be there.
Laura, can I jump in on this
Yes.
as well?
Yes, please.
In general, particularly if you're looking at the US, the most money that you can get is actually from the institution. So in my experience, I don't know, I've done this for 22 years across 4 continents and 6 schools. The sponsorships and the external scholarships can take care of a small gap, but never something that's full, like tuition, room and board. I would say though, out of the countries that we've mentioned, the countries that have the most robust external scholarships, aside from Hungary, would be Japan. Japan has a lot in regards to governments, external scholarships. There's a whole websites on it. It seems more systematized for whatever reason in Japan. And if there's somebody in Japan in the room who can speak to this, that would be great if you want to just jump up and explain this. But I'll just put that out there in regards to external scholarships. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Joan. And I've just been given a 2-minute warning. we're gonna keep to time. I see 2 hands that immediately shot up. Oh, 3, God. Okay. Well, I will stay behind if there are others. Maybe we can, since we started a little late, but quickly, let's start here.
So there are some scholarships where it needs nomination from the counselors from the school. If you guys want to talk about that and explain others, it will be helpful.
Okay. So I'll ask Prabha or someone from IC3 to say how the slides will be shared later. Maybe it'll just be on the website. But the question about some scholarships for various universities, University of Toronto in Canada comes immediately to mind. They require a nomination from the school, right? And in fact, specifically with the University of Toronto, you have to register in advance to be approved to nominate someone. So it's a whole process. To me, I mean, all due respect to Canada or to Toronto, that's a barrier in the process for low-income students. Low-income students may not have an advisor that can write a letter like that, or an advisor who knows that you have to sign up early. But we figure these things out. We navigate as we go. So those are things to look out for. That maybe there's a form that needs to be filled, maybe there's something that needs to be submitted by a certain or a different deadline than the student's application deadline. Particularly if they are merit-based financial scholarships, merit-based scholarships for, you know, the so-and-so scholarship or the this activity scholarship, there may be a nomination process that you have to look out for. Thank you for raising that point, yeah.
Laura,
Yes.
can I jump in on this one as well?
Yes.
So here's a tip in regards to nominations for the United States. So for example, UNC Chapel Hill's Moorhead Kane Scholarship or the Jefferson Scholarship at UVA, write to the criteria. Okay, so if you are able to and have the capacity to, don't use the same letter that you're using for the common application. Write to the specific criteria. So for example, Moorhead Kane has 4 very specific criteria. One is moral leadership. When would you, I don't know, I don't usually think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be talking about this kid's moral leadership in a common application recommendation. I mean, it might come to mind, but that's really niche and really specific. So when there is specific criteria, and there often are, that's the rubric, folks. That is the rubric that people are using. If it's divided into 4, it's like, okay, these are the 4 that need to be covered. So write to the criteria. You can even structure your recommendation in regards to that criteria. So in my previous role, when we did UNC Chapel Hill Moorhead Kane applications, we would literally be like moral leadership and then write a paragraph, and then be like, you know, community service and then write a paragraph, and then fitness. That is actually one of the criteria for that particular scholarship, and write a paragraph. So go one step deeper. That level of advocacy can make a difference with particularly hugely competitive merit scholarship, full tuition, room and board, you know, the whole shebang type of scholarships. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for the question.
That's a very good idea, yeah. Do we have time for one more? Yeah. There was a woman in the back, I'm sorry, I don't know if she left. I think she might have bailed, so Clay.
I just wanted to add another resource. There's an international student who came from India, from Calcutta, who's now at Amherst, and he put together a wonderful list with a HALI student who's now at Ashoka, and it's called Auxilia. And it's a little bit more comprehensive, and it's also interactive, but it's only U.S. universities. What I'll do is put that resource on the Facebook and other social media sites associated with IC3. Auxilia. 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 If you Google that and financial aid, it's an interactive site. They use up-to-date language. They don't use the word merit. They use need-based, non-need-based. So they follow the NACAC guidelines, and it's a very good resource based on the common data set that he's grown.
Thanks very much, Clay. And if we we'll make sure that gets shared around. If we're able to edit the slides before they're shared, we'll add it there. I think we have to close. I'm getting pointed looks. So on behalf of everybody on the panel, and particularly Joe and Ryan, who are bleary-eyed but faithful and devoted to the cause of more equity and more access to higher education. We appreciate so many of you coming. Feel free to ask questions in the future. Please continue the conversation and collaborate, right? We are lighthouses, and there is no competition between lighthouses. We are showing students and families the way forward. It's not competition, and it's good to share resources. It's not bad. So please, if you learned something here today, share it with a colleague in the name of IC3's mission. And enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
I would just like to say a big thank you to Laura, John, Joe, and Ryan for this session, which I'm very sure all of us have found very enriching and very helpful. From my personal experience, I would like to say that these 4 panelists are among the most committed persons whom I know, and who have not left any stone unturned to help students. So thank you once again, and I'm sure that you can reach out to them with any additional questions, any additional query that you might be having.